Happy Halloween, everyone! Let's start off with some good spooky news from this good spooky country. Dow on track to wrap up worst month since March. Walmart removes guns, ammo from its shelves ahead of next week's election. US reports 90,000 new daily cases, the equivalent of more than one per second. Tucker Carlson suddenly says it's time to leave Hunter Biden alone. Glenn Greenwald resigns from the Intercept, citing censorship of his story on Hunter Biden. Days from election, police killing of black man Roils, Philadelphia. US death toll from Hurricane Zeta rises to 6, millions without power. Donald Trump Jr. said COVID-19 deaths are almost nothing. The virus killed more than 1,000 Americans that same day. Trump to strip protections from Tongass National Forest, one of the biggest intact temperate rainforests. Spooky indeed. I want to focus all of today's episode on the upcoming election. I've been compulsively checking voter registration, demographic trends, and voter turnout predictions since the Democratic primaries, so I think I have a little bit of insight into what might happen, but my guess is as good as yours, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I want to start with my prediction. I think Joe Biden is going to win Tuesday's election. More specifically, I think this is what the map is going to look like. Biden 356, Trump 182. For reference, this is what the 2016 map looked like. Trump 306, Clinton 232. I kept on going back and forth with Iowa and Ohio. I think those are going to be the closest races, but because Teresa Greenfield is doing pretty well and because Iowa seems to be having a pretty substantial COVID spike at the moment, I do think Iowa is going to vote to the left of Ohio. Texas was another state I had surprising difficulty calling. I say surprising because, well, it's Texas. It hasn't gone blue since Jimmy Carter ran in 1976, and Trump won it by 800,000 votes in 2016. For a long time, Texas had solid GOP DNA. White working class people helped Republicans run up the margins in suburban and rural counties, but that might not be enough anymore. In addition to demographic changes in the form of rapid urban growth, which tends to benefit Democrats, suburban white women, one of the groups responsible for securing the victory for Trump in 2016, have been moving away from him in huge numbers. There's a variety of reasons why these women have become disillusioned with the GOP. Child separation policies at the border, the president's response to the Black Lives Matter protests, and the right's insistence on traditional gender roles have all pushed socially liberal suburban women into Biden's camp. I still think Trump has an edge, but the unprecedented turnout we're seeing, especially in high-density areas like Harris County, bodes pretty well for his opponents. Another important and close race is happening right here in my home state of Florida. Polls have been pretty close, showing everything from a Trump +4 to a Biden +7 in recent weeks, but I'm erring on the side of optimism and saying that I think that Florida will flip to Biden. Trump won the state in 2016 by just around 1%, or 100,000 votes, which isn't exactly a safe margin. Any erosion of his base could spell real trouble for Don. Even though the Latino vote in Florida is dramatically more conservative than it is in other parts of the country, a majority of Hispanic-identifying people in the state say they're going to vote for Biden. And Trump's mishandling of the coronavirus has eaten into his support among seniors, one of the most electorally important demographics in the entire state. Right now, early voting looks to be benefiting the Democrats, ever so slightly, but that's just party affiliation. Nate Silver of 538 did some analysis and found that if polls hold up, the current early vote in Florida is benefiting Biden more than it appears. But the outcome will all depend on who will show up to vote on Election Day and whether or not Republicans can claw back the lead. I'm pretty confident in saying Arizona is going to flip to Biden. Polling there has been reliably blue for a bit now, but I'm less confident about Georgia. Trump had been leading there for the majority of the election cycle, but as the pandemic rolled on and Trump's debate performances hurt his standing, Biden was able to take a slight lead. Because Georgia is also voting on 2 Senate seats, voter enthusiasm is high. Youth and black turnout is especially good, which again usually benefits Democrats. I think Biden will narrowly be able to flip the state, but because Georgia employs some of the worst voter suppression in the country, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is able to maintain the state. And now the big three, where it all went wrong last time. The former blue wall. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I won't go into too much detail about Michigan because Trump has been consistently abysmal in the polls, and his attack on Gretchen Whitmer after a failed kidnapping plot only hurt his chances there. So I think that'll be an easy pickup for Biden. Wisconsin was one of the only states that polls got really wrong in 2016, like outside the margin of error wrong. After that election, pollsters retreated back into whatever cave they hide in whenever it's not election time to figure out what went wrong. And they found that largely, the error came from not screening for education. Before 2016, education differences weren't all that partisan. But Trump ran on fake populism and appealed to white working class voters who had felt abandoned by politicians for years. So he was able to carve out a large swath of the non-college educated voting demographic. Polls have since adjusted to include an education screen and show Biden with a big lead. A recent ABC Washington Post poll had Biden up 17 points in Wisconsin. And even though that's most definitely an outlier, it shows just how steep of a climb it is for Trump in that state. And there are material reasons why Trump is doing so bad in the Badger State. His trade war with China has decimated farmers. The coronavirus is surging through rural counties. And Trump's failed Foxconn project promised to employ tens of thousands of Wisconsinites, but ended up employing just over 100 and burned through $4 billion in taxpayer money. Hillary also had no ground game there in 2016. This time, the Biden team made sure to focus some of their energy in that state. In 2016, Trump was able to win the state by 23,000 votes. So it isn't exactly difficult to see how his colossal failures are going to cost him the state. Pennsylvania is really where the election hinges. It's the blue wall state that Biden is leading in by the smallest margin. So if he's able to secure it, the election would pretty much be over. He's currently up by a little over 5 points. So it's not like it's a toss-up, but it's far from safe. Biden has gone all in with trying to garner support there by evoking his Scranton roots. In 2016, Trump was able to win the state by garnering support from traditionally Democratic voting coal miners and steel mill workers, and because Hillary was a uniquely unpopular candidate. This time around, Trump has tried to capitalize on Biden's stances on oil subsidies and fracking to regain the lead, but because he only won the state by less than 50,000 votes, Biden's better performance in urban areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh relative to Clinton is going to make that a hard hill to climb. And that's kind of it for the presidential race. I could be wrong about everything I just said and come back here next week with a baker's dozen eggs on my face, but I'm locking in those predictions. That's my final answer, Alex. As for the Senate, which will determine how effective each president is in passing legislation, I predict Democrats will take control of 52 seats and Republicans will fall to 48, losing the majority. Here's the map. Most of the races are safe, so it's not worth going into detail about those, but a surprising number are vulnerable. Democrats are almost certain to lose Doug Jones' seat in Alabama to former college football coach Tommy Tuberville. The only reason he was narrowly able to win the seat in the first place is because he ran against a literal child molester. As for Republicans, they're set to lose a good chunk of their seats. Cory Gardner in Colorado is way down in the polls to former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper. Martha McSally, who lost her last Senate race and is only currently a senator because of her appointment after John McCain's death, is down significantly against former astronaut Mark Kelly. In Maine, Susan Collins went from being one of the most approved of senators to one of the least approved of after voting to approve Brett Kavanaugh and for being in favor of Trump's tax cuts. Her challenger, Sarah Gideon, has consistently been ahead of her in the polls and is poised to take over the seat. In North Carolina, Thom Tillis has also fallen out of favor, and after contracting coronavirus through Trump's super spreader event at the White House, his chances have only gotten worse. And even after Cal Cunningham was caught in that sexting scandal, Thom Tillis' chances of retaining the seat are not that good. In Iowa, Joni Ernst had been reliably leading in the polling for most of the election cycle. But after coronavirus began to ravage the state and Ernst failed to recall the break-even price of soybeans during a debate against Teresa Greenfield, she has found herself in the red. Georgia has 2 Senate races this year, but I am somewhat conservatively going to say that only one of them is going to flip to the Democrats. In the special election, Baptist pastor Raphael Warnock was able to pull ahead of Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler, 2 far-right conservatives, in the polls after being endorsed by Obama. And in the regular race, John Ossoff has been eating into David Perdue's lead after demolishing him in their most recent debate, and after his nose was elongated in traditional anti-Semitism in one of Perdue's advertisements. And even in the states that I don't think are going to break our way, some incumbent Republicans are up for the fight of their lives. Steve Daines is up against Governor of Montana in the Senate race. Lindsey Graham is fending off Jamie Harrison, who has raised more money than any Senate candidate in history in South Carolina. Dan Sullivan is campaigning against doctor and commercial fisherman Al Gross in Alaska. Races in Kansas and Texas are also technically competitive. And that's sort of it for the Senate. 52 for the Dems would allow Kamala to break a tie when senators like Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema defect from the caucus. As for the possibility that Trump is going to use the courts to steal the election, that's very possible, but I didn't sort of plug it into my equation, so yeah. There's not much else to say except for, if you haven't voted yet, please go vote. It's very important. We only have 4 more days. And most likely we'll know either November 4th or November 5th, but if we don't, remember that waiting is okay. It's normal. Don't let the media, don't let the president convince you that we have to know on election day. That's never how it works. So stay strong, and remember, we live in a democracy. We have to sort of keep it that way. Yeah, okay. Let's hope for the best. If you want to learn more about any of the stories I talked about today, links are in the description. If you want to keep forcing me to wake up early on Saturdays, like and subscribe. Have a spooky Halloween!